In this paper, I focus on the political significance of the breaks of tradition and authority in the thought of Hannah Arendt, and I explore an attempt to address these issues through readings of Franz Kafka's literature. I will start by focusing on Arendt's essay, What is Authority? After mentioning a critique of an overreaching tendency in the social and political sciences that tries to eliminate the break of tradition by arguing for a transition of meanings from the worlds of religion to politics, I will move to an examination of the political meaning of authority in ancient Rome and its reappearance in the American Revolution. This part concludes with noting Arendt's doubts on the relevancy of revolution. While in the introduction to Between Past and Future, Arendt explicitly argues that the book's essays, including What is Authority, do not intend to retie the broken thread of tradition or to invent some new meanings to fill the gap between past and future. In the second part of this paper, I will argue that she tries to do something of this sort in her early writings on Franz Kafka. Focusing on the reappearance of the metaphors of architecture and blueprints, I will suggest that in reality lacking the bond of religion, tradition, and authority, and when revolution is no longer a solution, a specific mode of reading literature can become the measurement in light of which we can understand the world we live in or build one anew. In the first section of What is Authority, and before Arendt moves to a constructive analysis of this term and its loss in modernity, she remarks on what authority has never been. Within these arguments, she criticizes certain discursive practices that focus on similarities instead of developing differences and distinctions. This kind of argument often appears in a thesis that explains the nature of modern phenomena by emphasizing its supposedly theological origin. These theories emphasize certain similarities between theological and political structures, thereby they implicitly assume a continuity between the religious and the secular. In arguing for some sort of secularization of concepts, these theories cover over the break of modernity. As Arendt emphasizes in another context, hold on, let me share my screen. As Arendt, just a second, okay. As
Margin?
Can you see it? Sorry? Yeah?
אתה יכול להגדיל קצת את המסך? Enlarge it?
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Can you see only the presentation or only my, or also my text?
Only presentation.
Okay, good. As Arendt emphasized in another context, the separation of religion and politics, quote, affected both sides so fundamentally that nothing is less likely to have taken place than the gradual transformation of religious categories into secular concepts, which the defenders of unbroken continuity try to establish. Though the tendency to emphasize similarities and to blur differences is not unique to theories of secularization, but is common in social, political, and historical sciences. As Arendt stresses, there exists a silent agreement in most discussions among political and social scientists that we can ignore distinctions and proceed on the assumption that everything can eventually be called anything else, and that distinctions are meaningful only to the extent that each of us has the right to define these terms. The problem with the view that one can create one's own terms is not only a scholarly issue, but also a political one. To use Arendt's own example, when terms such as tyranny, authority, and totalitarianism are not well defined, they lose their common agreed upon meaning. The consequence of losing these collective understandings of terms is that we cease to live in a shared world. As we know from Arendt's other texts, the existence of a shared world is the condition for political action. Moreover, the destruction of a common world is one of the signs of life under totalitarianism and the common practice of totalitarian regimes. So the blurring of terms is more than simply a scholarly issue, but why does it happen? One reason that is relevant to our discussion is the break of tradition that prevents the transmission of meanings from one generation to another. A second reason for this scholarly confusion is the mixing of logic of identity and functionality. Arendt explained this through a consideration of a widespread Western conviction that communism is a new religion. As she tells us, this argument ignores the explicit atheism of communism, and it focuses instead on the insight that communism fulfills the same social, psychological, and emotional functions that religion fulfills in the free world. As she writes, the social scientists' concern is only with function, and whatever fulfills the same function can, according to this view, be called the same. It is as though I had the right to call the heel of my shoe a hammer because I, like most women, use it to drive nails into the wall. This discursive critique can reveal Arendt's contribution to the debates on secularization from the time, debates that involved Karl Löwit, Hans Blumenberg, and Carl Schmitt, the second. Yet, the purpose of her essay is to explore the political meaning of authority in history and political thought. After claiming that Plato and Aristotle tried and failed to develop such a political notion of authority, Arendt claims that the Romans succeeded in locating authority in the midst of their political experience. For the Romans, authority initiated obedience without using any form of coercion, as we just heard. This notion emerged, this is the point of freedom. Yeah? The notion emerged from the bond of religion, tradition, and authority. Religion made only the act of founding and preserving the foundation. The Senate's authority was understood to be derivative and dependent on the authority of the founding fathers, whose testimony was preserved and handed down from one generation to the next in tradition. In order to explain what it meant to be in authority, Arendt uses an architectural metaphor that emphasizes the difference between the author and the actual builder. The author is not the builder, but the one who inspired the whole enterprise, and whose spirit, therefore, much more than the spirit of the actual builder, is represented in the building itself. In distinction to the artifacts who only made it, he is the actual author of the building, namely its founder. With it, he became an augmentor of the city. We will come back to these literary architectural metaphors and the distinction of authors and builders, but for now, it is essential to see that in Rome, obedience to authority was built upon freedom. As Arendt clarifies, the relationship of the author and the builders is different from those of a master who gives orders and a servant who executes them, whereas authority is held by the Senate and derived from the past, power lies at the hand of the people. After locating the origin of the political meaning of authority in ancient Rome, Arendt claims that the sole modern example for the political experience of authority appears in the American Revolution. In this essay, namely What is Authority, Arendt does not discuss as many aspects of the American Revolution, but she emphasizes that this revolution avoided violence in contrast to the French Revolution. Moreover, Arendt reminds us that the declaration of independence comes only after the colonization of the continent. Thus, the Constitution essentially, quote, confirmed and legalized an already existing body politic rather than made it anew, end of quote. Arendt concludes the essay by noting that revolutions and their relation to foundation, quote, seem to be the only salvation which this Roman Western tradition has provided for emergencies. Yet, Arendt continues, the fact, quote, the fact that not only the various revolutions of the 20th century, but all revolutions since the French have gone wrong, ending in either restoration or tyranny, seems to indicate that even this last means of salvation provided by tradition have become inadequate. With this note, we reach a dead end. We know that authority is highly significant political experience that emerged from the bond of religion, tradition, and authority. The only heritage of this experience that can be valuable for us to confront the real state of emergency, so to speak, today is a revolution. But drawing on our modern experience, this solution seems to be no longer appropriate. Tragic as this may sound, Arendt does not say that we cannot confront emergencies, but only that a revolution seems not to be the right means for it. It is my assumption that while Arendt seems to be skeptical about the capabilities of a Roman foundationalist kind of revolution, she does think, at least experimentally, of the possibilities of literature. Interestingly, the link between the American Revolution and the Roman is the act of founding. These acts should be thought of as writing architectonic blueprints that should be interpreted over and over again to augment and preserve the political communities they constitute. The success of these acts of foundings, something new in revolution, is now doubted. But what if the real loss of authority is in fact illiteracy? What if we do not need to write new blueprints, but only to recognize old ones and to develop the capabilities of reading them? To briefly explore this option, I want to turn back to Arendt's early writings on Franz Kafka and to the metaphor of blueprint. Arendt's 1944 essay, Franz Kafka, Revaluation on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of his death, was her first essay on Kafka's literature and the first that was published in a major New York venue. Among other topics, this essay discusses the function of necessity in the modern political state, modern bureaucracy, and its effect on the life of the subject, the possibility of political resistance, stateless people, and the Jewish question. For the sake of brevity, I cannot give a complete account of this essay today. Significant to our context is Arendt's observation that Kafka was not interested in describing the world as it appears in everyday reality, but rather as a structure. Thus, she argues, Kafka was not, Thus she argues, instead of vivid stories occupied by colorful figures, Kafka presents simple events and characterless figures. According to Arendt, Kafka's technique is, quote, a construction of models, end of quote, which he uses to expose the naked structure within which human experience takes place. In this sense, Kafka's stories are like blueprints. And Arendt writes, if a man wants to build a house, or if he wants to know a house well enough to be able to foretell its stability, he will get a blueprint of the building or draw one up himself. Kafka's stories are such blueprints. They are the product of thinking rather than a mere sense experience. Compared with a real house, of course, a blueprint is a very unreal affair. But without it, the house could not have come into being, nor could one recognize the foundations and structures that make it a real house. Kafka provides his readers a blueprint that can reveal the structure of the house in which they live, or that aids them in building their house anew. But in contrast to the Roman environment, here there is no religion, tradition, or authority to support the transmission of knowledge. In this sense, the decline of authority creates the necessity of reading. What I'm suggesting is that in her comments on Kafka, Arendt examines the conditions of the foundation after the decline of authority. In this ruined world, people are not authors who write blueprints or found something new. They are not even readers builders who freely follow the direction they receive from the past blueprints to augment the foundation farther. Yet, even in this degraded state, people can still read blueprints in order to understand them. This moment of understanding blueprints brings them to the level of the builders. As Arendt explicitly claims, quote, "The same imagination is to be used for the building of houses as for understanding them," end of quote. Unsurprisingly, however, Arendt claims that most readers miss Kafka's blueprints because they seek something else. Some readers are too scared to realize that the world reflected in Kafka's stories is their own. Thus, they looked for a deeper meaning through theological and psychoanalytic interpretations. Other readers are too, quote, "fascinated with paradoxes" to listen to the call of reason coming up from Kafka's texts. Finally, there are the receptive readers, who are too educated to fit into society without resisting its doctrines. When it comes to Kafka's prose, all these type of readers are doomed to fail, since, quote, "blueprints cannot be understood except by those who are willing and able to realize by their own imagination the intentions of architects and the future appearances of buildings." The miracle is, however, that sometimes there appears an appropriate reader of Kafka's texts. Seeking to understand the world in which one resides and the possibilities of change in it, this reader turns to the blueprints provided to him by Kafka. Quote, "Only the reader," yeah, is it this one? Yes. "Only the reader for whom life and world and men are so complicated, of such terrible interest, that he wants to find out some truth about them, and who therefore turns to storytellers for insight into experiences common to us all, may turn to Kafka and his blueprints, which sometimes in a page or even in a single phrase expose the naked structure of events." As we saw before, one essential issue of modernity and the loss of authority is the disruption of a common world, which in itself conditions our capability to act in concert toward a collective goal. According to Arendt, Kafka's quality is that despite the break of tradition, his stories capture experiences common to us all. Importantly, however, Kafka's blueprints are not the same as the Roman foundation or revolution. Whereas in the completed world, the blueprint provides a plan according to which houses should be built, rebuilt, and preserved, Kafka's blueprints uncover the structure of the current ruined reality as it is. They do not offer foundations that keep together a community of people who share certain aspirations, but rather expose the last common experiences that are still present in our reality. As Arendt teaches us in the last words of What is Authority, these last common experiences, which are in a sense also the first, are what we need to confront anew in our modern political life without religion, tradition, and authority, namely the problem of human living together. Thank you very much.